Welcome back to the channel, guys. I hope you're having a great day today. We're going to talk a little bit about, in a recent interview, I believe her name is Lauren Ingram from Fox News. Is it Lauren Ingram? Um, in a recent interview with President Trump, Donald Trump talks about the importance of H-1 visas. What's come as a shock to many Americans is the idea that Trump champions these H-1 visas uh, to the point where many who have backed his American First policies, a great deal related to immigration, right? The idea of putting the American worker first and being able to make sure Americans get to perform quality jobs and make a good living. Um, it would seem that to some Americans, this is a type of this is not putting them first, and some may even see it as just outright betrayal of following Donald Trump. Uh, so we want to listen out a little bit about what was said in this particular clip. Uh, where President Trump was, what his position was exactly. And but before we look at the clip, I can pretty much uh, say that this is not a new conversation. This is actually a very old conversation, right? Very old, in fact. Um, the idea of uh, qualified immigrants coming into America and leading industry and helping to improve industry has been a great foundation for the success of America. And let me explain what I mean by that. If you look at the American structure when it comes to education, right? In many graphs and charts, you're going to see that America does not lead in education, right? That there are many nations ahead of America. And the problem with that is that, in the terms of being a superpower, right, when you consider a superpower, but then you put next to a superpower that the smartest people in the world don't originate there, what happens when you're a superpower, but you don't have the smartest people, right? It's going to follow that it's likely you're going to stop being a superpower because the smarter group of people, they're going to get ahead of you in technology and many other things that can shift the direction of who leads whom and what and where, right? And so what America has done is they've been very successful in leading the globe, even though they didn't. America doesn't lead in education, but it's been very successful in leading the world in the highest level and highest amount of PhDs, right? Meaning that it had a very good recruitment program and making sure these people stay here with their H-1 visas and such, right? And America doesn't want to lose the grip on that, right? Um, Having these people that are very intelligent, very smart, very hardworking, very focused. Could be from their culture, and they've always been this way. Which could, as they've come from different types, forms of government, different environments, different cultures, and such, which may not necessarily be in the same scope or frame of the American culture, whereas the American culture may be a little bit more lax in certain areas, right? For lack of a better word. Uh, so those are all very important things to know. The other very old conversation or conversations been going on for some time is just the idea of retraining people, right? So what Trump says in this clip, or he focuses on, is the idea of Americans wanting to perform these higher technical jobs that they haven't been doing because it's been long since past America has been a manufacturing focused nation, right? We've been getting other people to make our things for a long, long time now. And so the argument could be raised, we're out of practice with it. Uh, in relation to something like universal basic income, it's a very relative argument because what comes up quite a bit is the idea that in a technological boom, right? In a change where artificial intelligence and robotics creates these more technical jobs, and then the idea of the fourth industrial revolution, where out of that comes new jobs to replace the old jobs, right? Even if it were to lay a perfect ratio of jobs lost being replaced in a balanced ratio, right? To the level of these jobs would be uh, balancing out each other, right? Meaning that the jobs that were lost, those people who didn't have those jobs, they can now come into a point of a new job. Now, those people would have to be able to perform these new highly technical jobs, right? In other words, the truck driver would go from a truck driver to maybe someone who maybe he maintains a, a machine of some sort that requires quite a bit of computer engineering skills or maintenance or whatever. However it goes, he's able to be retrained into that area. What Donald Trump is saying is that uh, there'll be so many dangers in that in the very beginning stages of that, because you have to train these people, and if these are dangerous jobs or if they are very highly important jobs, in the very beginning, this new workforce wouldn't be able to perform this task at an optimal level if they'd be able to perform it at all, right? And there is a disconnect from that type of conversation. And I think it's due in large part because people don't want to feel they can be replaced in a job. Jobs are more than just going to work for some people. It defines whom they are with some people, and they just do not want to accept that they can be replaced by a machine. And that's what's so hard in this conversation. I think what Donald Trump's telling Laura Ingrams and telling a lot of Americans out there that he obviously doesn't believe that Americans are going to have the intelligence or the skill levels to perform this to a certain degree. And whether he meant it to come out that way or whether he fully believes that or not, it is pretty much how the internet and how society is picking it up, right? They're taking it that way, and they're not taking it quite well. Although, again, this has been a very uh, relative old conversation of uh, the new workforce, as it were, going into job areas they haven't done in many years or never have done or may never be able to do, them attempting to try to do those jobs, and the great uh, set of circumstances that could uh, cause a great deal of resistance to them doing those jobs, but also just facing the idea that they may not be able to even perform these jobs. And even if they could, to a certain degree, the workforce coming from these other nations, right, on these H-1 visas, with the amount of intelligence they have, looking at the statistics of the educational levels, right, of these groups as opposed to Americans, right, all those things will come into play. And it might just come out that Americans just aren't any good at these jobs, right? Um, or not at the level that would keep us at a superpower status and keep us at a level to keep up with these other nations. All that said, um, what would what would these Americans do? You know, well, it probably would be something similar to what it is now, like with how we handle manufacturing, like how countries like China do the bulk of our manufacturing. They build certain components and devices and such that Americans just aren't good at. It's not practical for them to do it, or they're just not set up well to do it. And so I would imagine that in an advanced AI world, you could be in a similar situation where Americans, because they have no, what else could they do? What other jobs can they do if it's going to all be mostly technical work, right? And the most important parts of the workforce is going to be technical work, and Americans aren't going to be doing the technical work. Then you probably have to pay these Americans like universal basic income and such. And the technical jobs would either be done by the robots or either this group of people who do perform these tasks more efficiently. And I just think it's at this point in time, being in denial to think that idea of jobs returning back to America that no longer exists here. The idea of trying to compete against countries like China with tariff wars and such, and to the point where you've driven up the cost of manufacturing so high, any idea to give it back to the American workers, but the American workers just aren't going to be able to perform this at an optimal level. I think, all those things just have to be, people have to come to terms with it, right? So let's finish listening in on this.
H-1B visa thing will not be a big priority for your administration, because if you want to raise wages for American workers, you can't flood the country with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of foreign workers.
You also do have to bring in talent.
We have plenty of talented people here.
No, you don't.
We don't have talented people here?
No, you don't have. You don't have certain talents, and people have to learn. You can't take people off and.
So Trump is very clear there. In the scope of the, what we were just talking about. And that is the level of talent that's coming in. He's been very adamant and clear that we don't have that here. That the American people cannot compete on a level to perform those jobs, right? And obviously, when they're saying talent is going to be synonymous with highly technical jobs, right? That's what talent is going to relate to. Talent isn't going to be like some guy on an assembly line trying to make a pot or a pan. It's obviously going to be, some highly technical job, good job that Americans want. Trump is saying that these particular jobs, right? We're just not going to have we're just not talented enough to do them, Let's listen in a bit more. Excuse me for the interruption.
Like an unemployment line and say, I'm going to put you into a factory, we're going to make missiles, or I'm going to
How did we ever do it before?
Well,
when you and I were
I'll give you an example. In Georgia, they raided.
So Laura Ingraham right there, she says something to the point of, when she says that, how do we do it before, building missiles, building technology and things like that, the first thing I could think of she may have been talking about is like World War II, right? I think that was like the peak of that. World War II is a long time ago. That's a technology is so much more advanced than that when Americans could do those things, and there's been so much changes in that. I just think it's a misunderstanding from her to think that we could go back to those days. Unfortunately, I think she's not getting that.
Because they wanted illegal immigrants out. They had people from South Korea that made batteries all their lives. Making batteries are very complicated. It's not an easy thing and very dangerous. A lot of explosions, a lot of problems.
So again, he's talking about the highly technical levels of work, and that he doesn't, believe Americans obviously, and that's pretty much the same conversation we've been having with universal basic income to a great degree, and that is the uncomfortable conversation of, people who don't feel they could be replaced by, the robots or or could rise to the level to perform these highly technical jobs that could be retrained in the workforce, especially if they're coming out of a whole different job area, right? So they're trying to retrain those people. But it's probably likely they won't be able to retrain enough people, right, to do these jobs. There are talented Americans, and there are going to be very smart Americans who are going to be trained to do highly technical jobs, right? But that number of people, I'm guesstimating, will not even scratch the surface of what it's going to take to uh, create the standard of living and livelihood that an American is going to need to keep up in the workforce, right? So it's probably not going to work. And I think that's kind of where Trump's going with that entire H-1 visa thing. I think Trump's already given up on the possibility that Americans could handle this. Obviously, if he thought American citizens could handle this, he wouldn't have to bring in those people, right? So um, I think that's what's been kind of uproar in the conversation is. Anyway, guys, tell me all what you think about this. Do you feel that Donald Trump has a point? Do you think that he has no point? And he kind of got people's hopes up about bringing all these various jobs and putting Americans first as such. Or he's just being factual and telling the truth about what it is. I think I sit somewhere in the middle with the conversation, more kind of leaning with the idea of what Trump is saying does make sense, simply because the entire pattern of the United States when it came to technology, technical jobs, bringing in immigration, PhDs and such, and people to perform these jobs and keep us kind of ahead of the fray. It's always been like that. I don't ever remember a time it's not been like that. Americans have always recruited these people, right? Brought them in, these special talents and talented people, brought them in on these visas, right? And it's kept us ahead of the rest of the world. If you stop that, right, uh, I don't think President Trump trusts that Americans will be able to outcompete, these other nations, right? And he probably is correct, in my opinion. But anyway, I'd like to hear what you guys think. And if you're not going to be able to do these jobs, right, if you're not going to be able to perform these jobs, right, how are you going to make a living, right? Anyway, that's all I got to say in this video. Like content like this, don't forget to like, subscribe. Till next time, as always, take care of yourselves and each other.